when the advent of generative AI, I think that was a very, very significant shift because it really changed the way that we operate on a daily basis. Not even that much at corporate level, at structural level, in an individual basis. The way that we write emails, the way that we write articles, the way that we communicate and interact with AI on a daily basis. So for me, still, I think that the structure of companies is surprisingly the same, given like all these changes that are taking place. However, on the other hand, we all can see that traditional job opportunities, they are no longer as available, or even if they're available, they don't have the level of security that they used to have.
Work is changing, quickly, irreversibly, and often invisibly. I'm 𝗀𝘁𝗁𝗁𝗁, and this show is about understanding where it's headed and how we stay human in the process. Hello and welcome to Human Work After AI, the show where we explore the future of work, technology, and what it means to stay human in the age of AI. We're speaking with founders, technologists, and thinkers who are navigating the shift toward an AI-powered economy. Today's guest is Francisco Marin, founder and CEO of Cognitive Talent Solutions. Francisco is a global thought leader in the people analytics and organizational work analysis. His company works with Fortune 500 clients to map out how people collaborate, not just how they perform. Under his leadership, CTS has pioneered a network-first approach to HR, launched patent-pending AI agents for leadership and onboarding, and partnered with giants like Google and ServiceNow. Francisco, welcome to the show.
Hi, Chris. I'm happy to be here with you today. Thanks for the invite.
Well, it's great to have you. So I like to start with a little bit of your origin story. How did you first get into technology, and how did that lead you into the HR space?
Great. Well, I come originally from Spain. I studied economics in Spain, and then I had my student exchange year in Slovakia, in Central or Eastern Europe, right? Thanks to the connections that I made in that year, then I ended up working in IBM in Slovakia, in Bratislava. And my first job there was as a bid manager. Then I went into project management, became a 𝗰𝗶𝗶𝗀𝗀 black belt, started to get exposed to concepts like regression analysis and more advanced analytics. And then I transitioned to a job as a business analytics leader, where I had a team of 15 business analysts reporting to me. And in that job, I got exposed to technologies like Watson and cognitive computing. And we also did some cool projects around talent retention, using analytics to anticipate who was going to leave from the organization and mitigate their risk in a proactive manner. So I would say that I went into analytics because of my experience with 𝗰𝗔, but it was during the role at IBM that I first got exposed with more advanced AI and cognitive technology.
So what was the problem that you were seeking to solve in HR org development that led you to start Cognitive Talent Solutions?
Well, initially, when I started CTS back in 2018, our initial focus was really on talent retention because that was the area that we had the most exposure at IBM. But we quickly realized that this was an area that was becoming commoditized. Companies like Oracle were introducing some predictive talent retention capabilities in Oracle Fusion and other products. There were some companies in the space that were very mature, like 𝗁𝗂𝗋 Labs, who actually got sued by LinkedIn, and they went to the Supreme Court, right? So that kind of like the whole field became a little bit radioactive from a data privacy perspective. And this is one of the reasons why we started looking for opportunities to pivot. And that's when I came across organizational network analysis by interacting with some thought leaders in the people analytics space, like Soumya Santos Sen and David Green. When I came across organizational network analysis, I was very impacted by it because first, it was an area that was mature enough so that you were not the only person in the world doing this, right? But it was not crowded enough so that it was commoditized, right? So it was in this cool stage where, with some work, you could still be one of the key early adopters. And I saw immediately the huge potential that this had for the future of work in terms of providing a framework to manage increasingly interconnected and decentralized environments. So initially, I would say if I had to pinpoint a specific use case, probably would be the experience that we had at IBM when IBM went through a huge reorganization through the implementation of agile methodologies. We were really exposed to the challenges that companies face when appointing early adopters in this type of initiatives, right? So in the context of agile methodologies, for example, it was key to appoint the right agile champions. But in these large changes at scale, sometimes the people that occupy the early adopter role are people that are recycled from other jobs that do not necessarily have a passion for the methodology, right? Lean Six Sigma Black Belt, I had a certain exposure to Lean and other methodologies, right? So I saw that appointing the key early adopters was really important to accelerate change adoption, especially because if those early adopters happen to not be informal leaders or hidden influencers, the real informal leaders in the organization could create resistance against those changes, right? And this, I realized there was a challenge that many companies were facing, and this was also one of the key use cases that I thought that were very effectively addressed through organizational network analysis.
So for those not familiar with ONA, can you explain it a little bit in simple terms?
So organizational network analysis, also known as ONA, is basically a people analytics methodology that we use to analyze and visualize the informal interactions that take place within an organization. You can do this in one or two ways. There is active ONA, where we launch an online survey and we ask people to identify the peers they interact with based on a number of informal interactions, like sharing information, technical support, personal support, or inspiration. Right? So you select the names of the people you interact with, and we draw the network of connections in a very visual and interactive manner. The other way is passive ONA, where we look at aggregating metadata from email, calendar, video conference. And the way that we do it at CTS, basically, we only analyze groups of 5 or more people, and we do not look into the content of the communications, right? So we are big on the data privacy when working with passive ONA. But that way, basically, you can also get some cool insights on burnout risk, attrition risk, and response time, email activity. And the combination of active and passive ONA, when you add a layer of generative AI and AI agents, is incredibly powerful because, as I was mentioning, you can identify early adopters that are informal leaders and improve change adoption by up to 70%. You can also enhance the identification of high potential employees in the context of leadership development programs. Here, our research shows, for example, that 2/3 of high performing employees are not recognized as informal leaders by their peers. So if in the context of a leadership development program, you make sure that all candidates are both high performers and informal leaders, you can change your pipeline by up to 70%. And the third primary use case, which I think is very, very actionable, is the onboarding use case, where you can basically identify the person that is best positioned to be a buddy of a new hire and match them to shorten the time to productivity of that new hire by up to 40%. And all this with the deployment of agentic AI is completely automated, right? So now this makes a huge difference in terms of actionability.
Very interesting. So what size and type of organizations do you typically work with? Are there particular industries that you're primarily focused on?
We're pretty agnostic, really, because as far as the company has employees that interact with each other, they can benefit from this technology. Additionally, our primary target has been Fortune 500 companies. We completed some case studies with companies like Thermo Fisher, CBRE, and others. There are a number of other Fortune 500 companies that we're working with under NDA. But then, the tool is available in self-service mode, and we have completed also multiple case studies with companies. The minimum size would be 50 employees, but ultimately, the larger, the better. So the largest implementation we've done so far was 70,000 employees.
Wow. How big of a project was that for you guys? How long did it take to implement for that size of an organization?
Well, the implementation time is relatively quick. Both on the active and passive ONA side, we're looking typically at a 4 to 6 week implementation time. But obviously, when you work with a large multinational, there are a series of administrative milestones that you have to complete. This can make the internal sales process as well as the onboarding process much longer. Sometimes can take months, especially in the B2B space, right? But on the other hand, we've gone in the direction of building the native ONA capabilities for some of the mainstream vendors like ServiceNow or Google. And that is helping us shorten the cycle time significantly because typically these companies already have an existing contract with these companies.
Okay. So how do you get your foot in the door with some of these larger companies?
So one of the things that actually we started doing very early at CTS, and it's something that for me was very natural, but I realized later that not many companies were doing it, was actually to establish a network of partners from day one. I used to work at IBM. My first job was as a bid manager on the partner channel at IBM. So I was approving bids for large deals related to server deployment in countries like Spain, Portugal, Israel, Greece, etc. And for me, it was very natural to see IBM working through a network of partners and just replicated that right away, right? When I started CTS, one of the first things that I did actually was to establish a partnership with a consulting company in Spain called Factum, who became a really very, very foundational partner for us. We started working with them primarily in Spain, but then we started also working in South America, and eventually we expanded to the United States, although the company was American from day one. I think that really made a huge difference in landing these deals with large multinationals, because as a small company, there are so many factors you have to have in place to land one of these contracts that you cannot replicate it by yourself. There is the technology component, but there is also the trust factor of the company having done previous projects with your partner. There is also the consulting component, where you really have to be focused on technology to become a scalable company. And this is something that we learned the hard way. I mean, we deployed our self-service platform only in January this year. So that was the first time we had a platform that was end-to-end, completely automated. But still, like the role of the partner there was key. And we have three models of partnership, by the way. We have traditional partners that they operate in a certain region and they position this to their clients and they get a commission, sometimes adding consulting, sometimes just as intermediaries. But then we set up our own global extended team, which is a super beautiful decentralized community of consultants and ambassadors. These are typically unipersonal consulting companies, but they are simultaneously part of CTS and owners of their own company. And they have years and years of experience in organizational network analysis. And then we have ambassadors. There are people that are super passionate about what we do. And then basically they help us in any way they can with introductions, spreading the word, etc. So we have a decentralized team of 50 people at the global level. That's one of the keys. And then the last factor there is really the power of communities. Establish multiple initiatives. We have the People Analytics Society by DCH in collaboration with DCH, where we organize on-site events with heads of people analytics on a monthly basis in San Francisco and Madrid. Then I launch at personal level together with other thought leaders in the industry, the Network-First Manifesto, where we are basically laying out a series of principles for the network-first future of work in terms of networks, our hierarchies, collaborative freedom, other concepts there. And that has got a lot of traction very quickly. It just doubled in size yesterday, actually, from 40 to almost 100 members.
Wow.
So I think it's that combination of partnerships and managing the power of communities that really we made different than other companies.
No, it's fantastic. Have you seen any major shifts? You've been doing this since 2018, you said. So you've been through the pandemic and you've now been through the rise of AI. How has HR and organizational management like this changed over the past 7 years?
Well, I would say it has changed significantly, but it hasn't changed as much as it should, even this current state of technology. So yeah, definitely with the pandemic, there was a significant shift towards hybrid work models. And this was a process that to some extent had already started previously with adoption of agile methodologies, which are very decentralized in nature. And earlier than that with the concept of flat hierarchies and others, right? But the pandemic acted as a catalyst for hybrid work. And then when the advent of generative AI, I think that was a very, very significant shift because it really changed the way that we operate on a daily basis, not even that much at corporate level, at structural level, in an individual basis, the way that we write emails, the way that we write articles, the way that we communicate and interact with AI on a daily basis. So for me, still, I think that the structure of companies is surprisingly the same, given like all these changes that are taking place. However, on the other hand, we all can see that traditional job opportunities, they are no longer as available, or even if they're available, they don't have the level of security that they used to have. And that's why we like the Network-First Manifesto, right? Because I think that now is when we need to have a conversation about how that future organization look like, especially with the potential advent of AGI. Because once AGI comes, And to some extent, we are seeing the effects of that already. AI is going to amplify the framework that it interacts with. And if the framework is a framework that is excessively centralized or siloed, that can lead to set incentives that are not necessarily positive for people's experience, right? So that's why we champion this concept of collaborative freedom. Like, what is collaborative freedom? The basic idea here is that when you go to work to a traditional job nowadays, first you have an immediate supervisor that tells you what you have to work on, who you have to work with, where you have to work, and when you have to work. While it is relatively an efficient setup, it's not a setup that is designed to achieve self-realization or for people to express themselves with a high level of authenticity. However, there are certain scenarios where you can experience certain level of collaborative freedom. This first model is what we call a hierarchy-first model, which is grounded on the underlying principle of collaborative control. Now, if you launch your own podcast, as you're doing here, or if you launch your early stage company, or if you happen to be a freelancer, or if you happen to have a great boss at a multinational, you might experience a certain degree of collaborative freedom, meaning having freedom to work on something you're passionate about with people that resonate with you, and having freedom over your schedule, freedom to take a break when you're burnt out, freedom to, work on different areas of the day, depending on what works best for you. And the idea here is, how can we at structural level replicate some of these dynamics to enable collaborative freedom in large organizations, or basically at scale? And I think that networks are going to play a key role in that, because it's about finding a balance between human capital metrics and social capital metrics. Human capital metrics being like, what's your role, what's your academic background, what are your skills, and social capital meaning like how you inspire other people who comes to you when they need technical or personal support, how you share information, how are you perceived informally in an organization, right? So I think right now there is a disconnect. There is too much focus on human capital metrics, and what we're trying to do is to balance it to set up what we call a network-first future of work.
Interesting. Yeah, it's really fascinating. You mentioned the slow-moving corporations. I've had a lot of conversations with companies that are smaller. They work with different industries that are less tech-focused, and they talk about how slow they are to adopt a new technology. But you also have to think about these very large corporations. They may be eager to adopt the technology, but it takes a lot more time to implement it all the way down.
Yeah. And that's why inorganic growth has become a key strategy in the component of most large multinationals, right? If they want to enter a specific area like AI, quantum computing, or blockchain, they often go in the direction of acquiring a niche player and then integrate that into their ecosystem. And part of that is because they don't have a structure that is efficient enough or agile enough to catch up with the speed of technology. Our ability to organize ourselves is much slower than the pace of progress of technology. And that's a big problem.
So let's talk a little bit about your technology. How has your company changed in the 7 years as the technology has evolved? And then talk a little bit about the AI agents that you guys have built and designed.
Sure. Initially, when we started in the organizational network analysis space, we started with a very, very basic thing. We're completely bootstrapped, right? And at some point we got the angel investors and some institutional investment, although we keep in control of the company, the founders. Initially, it was basically a Tableau dashboard with a freelancer technical developer that was just drawing a network there, right? So it was the most basic thing you can imagine. It's funny because you look back on those times, they're the most fun.
Yeah, right.
Then the tool was breaking and it was not scalable at all, super manual, right? But that's how we started. And then we went into developing our own platform, the Cardinal Network Analyzer, initially with an active ONA module. And then we started integrating passive data sources as well, through the Microsoft Graph API. Then I would say the third wave of iteration there came when we started going in the direction of building the native organizational network analysis capabilities for ServiceNow. We started with the active ONA module, then with the passive ONA module, and this was directly in the ServiceNow store. It was not a connection with our platform. It was a tool built from scratch within their ecosystem. And now recently we've done the same on the passive ONA side with Google, in the Google Workspace environment. And then like in terms of AI, first we integrated generative AI, but in a way that is very unusual because when you interact with the generative AI chatbot on our platform, you ask a question, for example, who are the top 5 employees that I should leverage as change agents in a digital transformation initiative? The AI interacts with the platform in real time in a way that if it selects 5 names, it will explain why those names are selected in the chat, but it will also highlight those people on the network and the ranking, and even apply some filters, apply some colors to the notes. So it's a very interactive way of working with the generative AI component. And then like the generative AI is also able to analyze and summarize the content of executive summaries, have a deeper dive and analyze a specific graph if you want to. So we were probably, I think, the second or the third company in the people analytics industry to integrate generative AI. So we're very early. I think that before that probably was just Versin and 𝗏𝗲𝗄 with their V agent. And then and we were probably the third one. And then on the agentic AI, we were the first company in the people analytics industry to release actual functioning AI agents. So we released the first generation of AI agents for the people analytics space. This is a collection of 8 patent-pending AI agents that cover use cases like change management, onboarding, leadership development, organizational development. So I'll give you just a quick example on how the AI agent mentorship matcher works, right? So say if you're an employee that joins a new company, the agent will identify the person that is best positioned to be your buddy or mentor. So this will be decided looking at a variety of metrics like the informal level of that buddy, or the department, the role, performance, years of service, etc. And then if the HR administrator from the platform authorizes that intervention, the agent will reach out to the buddy and will gather his or her consent, informing the first line manager. If the buddy provides the consent, then the agent makes an introduction between the buddy and the new hire via email. So they get to know each other, schedules a meeting based on their availability, make sure that the meeting took place, gathers their feedback, and assesses the impact of this intervention in terms of reducing the time to productivity of the new hire. So it's really about rethinking onboarding as social activation. And this is a way on how AI agents can deploy micro interventions completely at scale across large organizations. And that's the beauty of this, right? The future organization we're going towards, I believe, is an AI-powered network where agents are deploying these micro interventions on a regular basis. And that's a framework where we can hopefully combine our identity as entrepreneurs, our individual identity as entrepreneurs, with our collective identity as members of a movement that resonate with our values and with our mission. But we should not really, in the current state of the workforce, right? You need to be competitive enough to be outstanding, right? And you cannot be competitive enough if you're not passionate about what you do. So we should, I think also there are different movements going on. There is a movement of decentralization. There is a movement of aligning the way that we organize ourselves with nature in a way, making it more organic. And this is reflected in biophilic design and other industries as well. There is a movement as well in terms of, you could call it spiritualization of work. I don't know if it's the right word, but it started with the role of the evangelist in Apple, which was very, very impacted by the culture in Silicon Valley about being passionate about what you do, right? It continued with the introduction of some concepts like mindfulness, for example. And I think that we're going towards a future of work where the lines between personal life and work life are more blurred. And it's really important to work on something that it's aligned with your values and with your mission and the impact that you want to make in the world. This is especially important for the new generations, for millennials, where I myself including Gen Z as well, right? Because they're simply not buying the traditional deal. They are dealing with it in different ways, right? Quite creating. The last trend I saw is called unconscious bossing, which is like, hey, I don't want to be a middle manager. I'm going to try to be an entrepreneur in any way possible. Or right away, I'm just going to disconnect myself from the workforce, right? But the new generation is sending you these signals that a change needs to happen for them to be part of the workforce in an engaged way.
Yeah. AI can really enable entrepreneurship. I think we're seeing that already. Yeah. And there's a lot of value in that corporate entrepreneurship, or what we might call intrapreneurship, entrepreneurship within an organization. But there's also a lot of politicization that goes along with that. Do you see AI helping to overcome some of those internal politics to help some of the good ideas that might come from lower in an organization be unleashed and actually have an impact on the company?
I think that AI is just like any other powerful technology, is neutral, but it again depends on the framework that it interacts with. It's nice to see that to some extent, as a result of the adoption of AI, and some maybe unwillingly, companies are becoming more flat, and kind of like there is less of a difference between operational role and strategic role. So now people are being required to have both strategic thinking and also being the individual contributors and get their hands dirty, right? So that to some extent is helping achieve a certain level of decentralization, but still most companies operate in a very centralized manner, operate in silos, and most people that work in large multinationals feel that there is a strong disconnect between the value they perceive they bring to the organization and the level of recognition and reward that they receive. And the second component is they also perceive a disconnect between the people that are actually receiving that reward and recognition and the people they believe should receive it. So those are the tricky questions, right? If the reward and recognition you're receiving is not aligned with your perceived value that you're contributing to the organization, and the people that you see are receiving that reward and recognition are people that you do not informally respect, or you feel that the people that you respect are not being recognized, then that will have a very negative impact on your employee experience. Will AI improve that? It will largely depend on to what extent we're able to iterate that structural framework that companies operate with. If it's a framework that intrinsically achieves a healthy balance between the human and social capital, I think that the impact of AI can be way more positive. If it's a model that exclusively considers titles, years of experience, then we might go into a direction where there are continuous layoffs. The people that remain in the company are very overburdened and burnout, but they do not necessarily have a better employee experience than what they had before those organizations took place.
So one of the big concerns that I've heard throughout the running of this podcast and my other podcast, Pitch, Build, Scale, is the conversation that AI isn't necessarily going to come out and replace all of these jobs, but it is making it much more difficult for entry-level people to get into organizations. And you start to see this growing divide between the people that have that experience and the people that want to get in the door, which ultimately will lead to eliminating or reducing the pipeline of people that can move up to those senior positions. What are companies doing to try to fix or solve this potential problem?
Honestly, for the most part, what I see companies are on standby mode, trying to just catch up, right? So I don't see many companies with a very clear strategy, maybe with the exception of Microsoft, ServiceNow. They're doing very strategic investments, but for the most part, most companies are just trying to navigate this, survive, right? What's the challenge there is that, first of all, the way that AI has impacted our lives, it has been completely counterintuitive. I remember when AI started to appear, most people thought, oh, the only people that are going to survive are the artists, right? Just art is the only thing that, then the first thing that was automated was, picture creation, stick creation, and anything that had to do with artistic pursuits. Then the second message was, okay, corporate jobs are going to survive, but it's really blue collar jobs that are going to be very much impacted. It's completely the opposite, right? I mean, literally, the plumbers and the other blue collar jobs are the ones that are being kind of not as affected, and construction jobs, whereas corporate jobs are being decimated. So any assumption that we had was really completely the opposite, right? There was one of these reverse Kramer type of memes that you see, right? So invest in that, and the opposite happens, right?
Right.
I think that there is something where there is a pattern, and it's every wave of technology that has hit Silicon Valley and then the rest of the world can be explained structurally through networks. The first wave was the internet. It's a network of computers interacting with each other. The second wave could be social media, which is inherently a network of people, again, interacting with each other. Then you have blockchain, which is a network of blocks. You have artificial intelligence, which is a neural network. And then you also have quantum computing coming, which also can be understood as a network. So we don't know yet really how the future of work is going to look like, but there is no doubt that networks are going to play a key role in defining that structure. That's why I love organizational network analysis so much. So now in terms of what companies are doing, some companies are being more agile or proactive in terms of exposing themselves to these new technologies, agentic AI, generative AI, blockchain. But ultimately, maybe it's just a matter of standards, right? Because I'm here in Palo Alto in Silicon Valley where you're really like 3-4 steps ahead. So AI agents become something like super natural to talk about. But then, we would talk to somebody in Spain or France or Belgium and what's an AI agent, So there's a disconnect as well where maybe it gives to us the perception that companies or the world itself is going too slow, but maybe it's just the nature of what happens in Silicon Valley. We're going too fast here.
Yeah, definitely. And it's easy to get into those echo chambers or bubbles on your social media or whatnot. And it seems like the world is going to end, it's moving so fast. But then you realize a lot of companies are barely even scratching the surface. They haven't even touched it. It's got a long way to go still.
Yeah.
So what are the ethical or social implications that are top of mind for you as AI becomes more predictive and prescriptive about human potential?
That's a great question. So first of all, I'm a big advocate of trust over surveillance, especially when analyzing the digital footprint of employees, members of society, just citizens, right? So again, some of these technologies are very powerful and they can be incredibly invasive when used in the wrong hands. So for example, when analyzing the digital footprint in tools like email, calendar, video conference, a big advocate to only analyze groups of 5 or more people and do not analyze the content of the communications. I think it's okay to provide individual insights to the individuals themselves, right? In a way that it can be consumed self-service, but not in a way where this is shared with your immediate supervisor or when some people that can somehow exercise any type of punishment based on this. And this right now is something that we start to see in the corporate environment where there are some companies maybe that are measuring the level of toxicity of employees or some extreme, cases where some companies create algorithms that document the notes that you're taking during a meeting by analyzing the sound of the keyboard, for example. But it has really much broader implications for society itself, because if you find yourself in a society where the government can analyze your digital footprint and in the moment that there is a signal that you do something they do not agree with, they can impact your ability to interact with your community at a scale, that's a very scary scenario, right? And that's why we need to now have the conversation, because the next 2 to 3 years are going to be key in terms of deploying AI and how that AI is implemented. So that's kind of what I say. And I think to some extent, it's a healthy thing that there are like multiple vendors like, OpenAI, xAI, Anthropic, Claude, etc., right? So that if the public expresses a preference for a certain type of AI deployment, it's the market can react to that, and we don't depend only on 1 or 2 vendors. And again, interesting thing, right? This evolves in ways you don't expect, because part of that is privacy. But for example, the phenomenon we're seeing with the AI companions. Actually, in my building in Palo Alto, I just saw this with xAI, right? With Annie and Valentine and so on. Super interesting. But actually, like in my building in Palo Alto, one of my neighbors is the founder of a company called 𝗁𝗁𝗶𝗶𝗀, where they do this type of AI companions as well. So this is an industry in itself, right? So you would never expect actually that the market would naturally want like an AI that acts kind of like a toxic boyfriend or girlfriend. And that, but that's what happens when there is actually a reactive market, or, there is a responsive market that adapts in real time to what people demand. And I think that's good to some extent, because it can, and I think like that's something that OpenAI has done very well from the very beginning. That is engaging the public in terms of all this experiment with AI, engaging us in the different iterations versus deploying it in a lab and then just release it and, hey, you deal with this and you have no say in it whatsoever, right? So that massive collective experience of iteration that we're going through AI, I think is the right way to do it. It's going to have some problems, of course, but I'm happy that we can experience it in our lifetime.
Yeah. So what advice would you give to young professionals that are just entering the workforce? Where should they focus if they want to, and I don't even know if this is possible, but future-proof their careers? I don't know that there's any way to future-proof right now, but
The only way that you can make your future proof is becoming adaptable, becoming resilient, becoming entrepreneurial. My opinion really is like you should never leave your work in the hands of another person. This is something that is too important, too sacred, too important of too much of a form of self-expression for you to have it completely dependent of the decision of an organization or a person. It's something that it should mean something to you. Right? You should not, again, allow yourself to work on something you're not passionate about. Your time is too precious. Your energy is too precious. And you have especially in the current environment where we are, right? Because now it's like, it's not even that critical for society that you go and do some administrative job for the functioning, right? I mean, what society needs really is for you to be an active part on collectively defining how that future looks like. And I agree completely. I mean, with the Gen Z, if you don't like what you see in the corporate environment, hey, just go and protest against it, right? Or just make clear that what is it that you want to see. Demand impact from companies in terms of aligning with your values, in terms of having a positive impact in the world on the environment, or giving you collaborative freedom by enabling hybrid work models, right? We have all collective power in that regard. But it's a very tough and also a wonderful moment to enter the workforce. And as a person that entered the workforce, and there was the financial crisis that was basically with the added housing crisis in Spain, then navigated the pandemic, right? This just becomes the new normal, right? So
yeah.
Just don't expect anywhere in the next 10 to 20 years any situation that resembles stability. Just get used to the ride and get to enjoy it, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So last question, I'll let you out of here on this. So how do you personally stay grounded in this space? What helps you remain human while building AI?
Yeah, that's a good question. Sometimes, as we use so much generative AI, there is this component of dehumanization. And part of that as well, this is a challenge of the hybrid work models. And the reason why models like WeWork were so successful, right? Because we are missing that human connection in a way. Me personally, I mean, like as a tech entrepreneur in Silicon Valley, I have a lifestyle that is filled with uncertainty and, with financial stability, physical, challenges, mental challenges, just part of the deal. And I'm super lucky because my wife, Katarina, who ended up setting up, she started as a co-founder at CTS, but she set up her own interior design company called Organic Interiors in Palo Alto. She's been like my grounding factor there, basically, and my emotional support. But I enjoy a lot, interestingly enough. One thing that helped me a lot navigate through uncertainty is learning about areas like alchemy, symbology, numerology, basically like ancient philosophies, something that was as intense as the type of transformation that I was going through. So I love minerals as well. I have a collection of like 40 labradorites on my place. Yeah, I find that, all of us, we have a rational and irrational part. So it's important to keep a healthy balance in both of them, especially when you need to develop extreme resilience. Sometimes irrational frameworks provide a much more effective tool to develop resilience than extremely rational frameworks. At some point, when you're starting bootstrapping a company, it doesn't really make sense from a rational perspective. And when you have to keep and not give up, and there is something in the mentality of people that really go through those iterations that need to work a bit in a different manner. So for me, it's about balancing you can call it masculine or feminine part, or rational or irrational part. And this is reflecting in the end as well in the duality of centralization versus decentralization, right? But I think you have to find your own path of expressing yourself. And that's in the end what creates the strong grounding. But that being said, I mean, Silicon Valley is the wild, wild west, right? It's a place that is both wonderful and horrible in some aspects as well, right? There is a mental health pandemic in general in the United States, which coming from Europe is something that you can see the clear difference, right? And it's something that is very unaddressed to some extent. But yeah, I would say that ultimately creating a support system, having a team of people that resonate with you, if possible, having a partner that can navigate this with you is very, very useful.
Yeah, absolutely. Great way to end it. Francisco, this has been a fascinating conversation. So thank you so much for coming on. Where can our listeners learn more about your work and get in touch?
Thank you, Chris, for having me. I enjoy a lot of the conversation as well. So I invite anybody to check cognitivetalent solutions.com. and also the site Network-First Manifesto.com. That way you can learn about the work we're doing in organizational network analysis and also how we are basically bringing people together to spearhead the transition from a hierarchy-first model to a network-first future of work.
And for everyone listening, thank you so much for tuning in. Please be sure to subscribe, leave us a review, share the episode, and we will see you next time on Human Work After AI. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Human Work After AI. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast provider so you never miss an episode, and we'll see you next time.